Ambassador Jian Li stepped out of the transport capsule and onto the polished chrome steel floor of the Galactic Federation negotiation hub. The air hummed with the low, perfectly modulated thrum of advanced environmental controls. Everything about the station, orbiting the binary giants of Cygnus X1, screamed efficiency and order. There were no decorations, no extraneous lights, just clean lines, soft grey walls, and glowing indicator strips guiding designated pathways. It felt less like a meeting place and more like the inside of a meticulously organized computer core. Waiting for him precisely 3 meters from the capsule door, as protocol dictated, stood the Vulperan delegation. Leading them was Chief Axiom Kyle. Kyle was humanoid in basic shape but possessed features reminiscent of an Terran Arctic fox, sharp muzzle, pointed ears that twitched almost imperceptibly, analyzing the ambient sound, and a coat of sleek, silver-grey fur covering his slender frame. His posture was rigid, economical, and his dark, intelligent eyes held no warmth, only focused calculation. Flanking him, slightly behind, were 2 nearly identical Vulperans, introduced via datapad simply as Unit 7 and Unit 12. They shared Kyle's precise movements and watchful, analytical gaze. "Ambassador Li," Kyle stated, his voice a perfectly level baritone, devoid of inflection. He offered a curt nod, the minimal movement required for formal greeting. "You have arrived precisely 0.8 seconds ahead of the projected schedule. Efficient." "Chief Axiom Kyle, Unit 7, Unit 12, Jian Li replied, offering a polite smile he knew would likely be registered as an unnecessary expenditure of facial muscle energy. "Thank you for meeting me. I trust your journey was satisfactory." Travel parameters were optimal. Resource expenditure was within 0.03% of projections. "Satisfactory is an adequate descriptor," Kyle replied without pause. He gestured smoothly towards an adjacent conference room. "Let us proceed. Time allocation for preliminary assessment is limited." The conference room was as sterile as the hallway. A smooth grey table dominated the center, chairs gliding silently into place as they approached. As soon as they were seated, Kyle activated the room's main holographic display. Complex charts, graphs, and probability matrices shimmered into existence above the table. "Ambassador Li," Kyle began, his eyes fixed on the data flowing in the air. "The Vulperan Consensus has completed its preliminary analysis of humanity's application for Galactic Federation membership. Our assessment is based purely on quantifiable data, historical records, and statistical probability modeling." He gestured towards a swirling vortex of data points highlighting key moments in human history. "Your species exhibits anomalies, recurring instances where outcomes dramatically diverge from predictable logical progressions." A graph spiked sharply upwards. Item: the 100-year darkness conflict. Terran forces faced resource deficits exceeding 80%, technological inferiority rated at 4.5 standard deviations below the opposing Xerxes collective, and projected casualty rates indicating total societal collapse within 12 planetary rotations. Yet, Terran forces achieved victory. Probability of this outcome, 1 in 1.8 million. Another data point flashed. Images of early space exploration, then a complex chemical formula. Item: discovery of the substance penicillin, derived from common mold contamination, identified through observation following deviation from sterile procedure. Logical protocols would have mandated discarding the compromised samples. Probability of discovery via this route, statistically negligible, reliant on chance observation and pursuit of non-standard results. Kyle pointed to a final, sobering projection showing ecological collapse models. Item: the Great Atmospheric Collapse of 2247. Global industrial output resulted in cascading environmental failure. Projections indicated irreversible ecosystem destruction and mass extinction within 3 generations. Yet, Humanity implemented radical, untested geoengineering solutions and enforced global cooperation protocols previously deemed politically impossible. Full recovery achieved. Probability less than 0.01%. Kael finally turned his piercing gaze directly onto Jian Li. Ambassador, these are but 3 examples among hundreds. Humanity consistently demonstrates a pattern of decision-making and achieving outcomes that defy logical probability. Actions are frequently undertaken based on insufficient data, emotional reasoning, or statistically unsound projections. While the results have occasionally, improbably, been favorable to Terran survival, this inherent unpredictability poses a significant risk variable to the stability and calculated order of the Galactic Federation. He folded his hands neatly on the table. Conclusion. Based on logical assessment of quantifiable risk factors, the Volpyran consensus currently classifies humanity as inherently unpredictable, potentially unstable, and therefore recommends against full Federation membership at this time. Jian Li suppressed a sigh. He had anticipated this line of reasoning. Dealing with the Volpyrans was like arguing with a hyper-intelligent calculator. Everything came down to numbers, probabilities, and observable facts. Concepts like spirit, determination, or flashes of genius didn't fit neatly into their equations. Chief Axiom Kael, Li began, keeping his tone measured and respectful. I understand your analysis. From a purely statistical standpoint, human history can seem erratic. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. They lack context. He leaned forward slightly. Let's examine one of your examples more closely. The development of our primary faster-than-light propulsion, the Li drive. He chose that one deliberately, hoping the name connection might add a subtle emphasis, though he doubted the Volpyrans would register such a nuance. Dr. Eris Thorne, Li continued, was indeed monitoring subspace frequencies, searching for anomalies predicted by established hyperdimensional theory. The accepted models showed nothing useful in the energy band he was observing. His colleagues urged him to abandon that line of inquiry. Resources were scarce, and logic dictated focusing on more promising avenues. Li paused, looking directly at Kael. But Dr. Thorne reported a feeling, a persistence that certain faint ghost-like readings dismissed by automated systems as sensor noise weren't random. He couldn't quantify it initially. It wasn't logical. It was, for lack of a better term, the Volpyran translation matrix can handle a hunch. Define hunch, Unit 7 interjected, its voice identical to Kael's. Input quantifiable parameters for this feeling. That's the point, Li said, trying to keep frustration from his voice. It wasn't immediately quantifiable. It was an intuitive leap, perhaps born from years of subconscious data processing, recognizing a pattern too faint or complex for current algorithms. He felt he was onto something, so he persisted against the prevailing logic. And because he did, he isolated the Thorne frequency, the key to stable subspace manipulation, and the Li drive. An illogical pursuit led to a breakthrough that advanced our civilization centuries. Kael's ears twitched slightly. The probability of Dr. Eris Thorne isolating the subspace frequency based on undocumented energy fluctuations was 1 in 4.7 million. Logically, resources should have been allocated elsewhere. The eventual success remains a statistical anomaly, not a validation of inefficient methodology. Li pressed on. All right, consider the Proxima Centauri B colony disaster, a Class X solar flare, far exceeding worst-case projections. Evacuation impossible. Our ships weren't fast enough then. Your own Federation observers at the time calculated a 99.98% certainty of total colony loss due to radiation and atmospheric stripping. Survival projections indicated a 0.02% chance, Unit 12 confirmed flatly. Data accurate. And yet, they survived. Lee stated firmly. Not just survived, they rebuilt. Why? Because when the alarms blared and logic dictated game over, they didn't just lie down and accept extinction. They worked. They jury-rigged atmospheric processors using mining equipment. They reprogrammed habitat shields using untested algorithms shared frantically across their network. They huddled in deep mine shafts sharing dwindling resources. They clung to hope. Define hope, Unit 7 requested again, its tone unchanging. Provide data correlating hope with atmospheric stabilization or radiation shielding efficacy. Lee threw his hands up slightly, a gesture of exasperation he immediately regretted. Hope isn't a shield generator, it's a psychological state. It's the refusal to accept defeat, even when probability dictates it. It's the driving force that pushed those colonists to try desperate, illogical measures, because the logical outcome was death. That drive, that sheer will to survive against the odds, is part of what makes us human. It's not always logical, but it's often effective ways. Kyle remained unmoved. Ambassador, emotional states are biochemical reactions. While measurable, their direct causative effect on external physical phenomena like solar flares or atmospheric integrity remains unproven and unsubstantiated. Attributing the Proxima Centauri outcome to hope is assigning agency to a non-quantifiable internal state. The event remains a statistical outlier, likely resulting from a confluence of unforeseen environmental variables and desperate random actions, one of which, by chance, proved partially effective. He leaned forward fractionally. Your history is replete with such outliers. You wage wars based on ideals, explore dangerous frontiers driven by curiosity, make scientific leaps based on intuition. These are not stable foundations for membership in a federation built on predictable logic and calculated cooperation. We cannot formulate reliable projections for a species that embraces the improbable as a standard operating procedure. Where is the equation for a gut feeling, Ambassador? What is the standard deviation of hope? Jian Li stared back at the impassive silver face. He had data, he had history, but he couldn't give them an equation for the human spirit. The chasm between their viewpoints seemed wider than the nebula swirling outside the station's viewport. Seeing the impasse, a third entity in the room, previously silent, activated its communication systems. It was designated simply as the Federation Mediator, a hovering construct of interlocking crystalline lattices that glowed with a soft internal light, representing the neutral body overseeing the membership application. The mediator transmitted, its voice, a series of perfectly modulated, resonant tones. The main holographic display flickered, replacing the historical charts with a star map of a nearby Federation sector. 3 inhabited planets were highlighted: Xylos Prime, high population, major agricultural hub; Baron 4, moderate population, strategic research outpost; and Cygnia Minor, low population, rich in rare minerals. Suddenly, a jagged, dark shape bloomed on the map near the 3 worlds, depicted as a swirling vortex of negative energy readings. The mediator intoned. Data streams began pouring into the hologram: sensor readings, population counts, available Federation assets in the sector. Critically, a flashing red indicator appeared over the sensor data originating near the anomaly itself. Before the mediator had even finished transmitting the parameters, Chief Axiom Kale and his units were already processing. Their eyes darted over the data streams, fingers flying across unseen interfaces projected onto the table before them. There was no discussion, no debate, just instantaneous, parallel processing. Unit 7 spoke first, its voice flat. Analysis: Xylos Prime. Population: 8.2 billion. Baron 4, 1.5 billion. Cygnia Minor, 350 million. Strategic value assessment: Xylos Prime, high, critical food supply. Baron 4, high, sensitive research. Cygnia minor, medium, resource value, replaceable. Unit 12 added, anomaly expansion vector probability indicates 92% confidence of engulfment for all 3 worlds. Partial evacuation of 2 worlds yields maximum projected survival rate of 1.2 billion, Baron 4 plus Cygnia minor, or 5.3 billion, Xylos prime plus either Baron 4 or Cygnia minor, prioritizing Baron 4 for strategic value. Full evacuation of Xylos prime yields guaranteed survival of 8.2 billion plus critical agricultural infrastructure. Kyle synthesized the data instantly. Logical conclusion. Prioritize preservation of maximum population count and highest strategic value assets. Optimal resource allocation is full evacuation deployment to Xylos prime. Accept total loss of Baron 4 and Cygnia minor. He looked towards the mediator. Volpyran decision protocol selects full evacuation of Xylos prime. Resource deployment calculations initiated. Fleet mobilization orders ready for transmission upon authorization. The entire process, from scenario presentation to definitive galaxy-altering decision, had taken less than 90 seconds. It was efficient, brutal, and entirely logical based on the available data and the goal of preserving the most assets and lives numerically possible. There was no hesitation, no expressed regret for the 1.85 billion lives on the other 2 planets condemned by the calculation. It was simply the optimal solution derived from the variables presented. Ambassador Jian Li watched the Volpyran calculation unfold with chilling speed. He reviewed the same data streams on his own console, the stark numbers painting a grim picture. Logic clearly pointed towards sacrificing 2 worlds to save the most populous one. It was the mathematically sound choice, maximizing the quantifiable value, lives, and strategic resources. Yet something nagged at him. His eyes kept drifting back to the flashing red indicator over the sensor data near the anomaly. The Volpyrans had factored in the 48% confidence level, essentially treating the corrupted data as unreliable noise. But Li zoomed in, filtering the chaotic readings. Deep within the jumbled energy signatures, almost lost in the background static, were faint, intermittent pulses. They weren't regular, but they didn't seem entirely random either. It reminded him of something, a resonance cascade pattern from an old physics lecture. It was barely a whisper of a signal. He felt it then, that same intangible certainty Dr. Thorne must have felt. A strong, undeniable hunch. What if those pulses weren't just noise? What if they were a key, a structural component, or even a vulnerability of the anomaly itself? Mediator, Li spoke up, his voice cutting through the quiet efficiency of the Volpyran calculations. I propose an alternative course of action. Kyle and his units paused their computations, turning their heads fractionally towards Li. It was the Volpyran equivalent of a surprised look. The sensor data near the anomaly, Li continued, pointing to the erratic pulses he'd isolated on the main display, while corrupted, shows faint, structured energy spikes. My hypothesis, and I acknowledge it is currently beyond proof by standard modeling, is that these pulses represent a potential resonant frequency interaction within the anomaly's structure. He outlined his plan quickly. Divert 15% of the available rapid response fleet. Equip them with broad-spectrum resonance emitters. Task them not with evacuation, but with approaching the anomaly's perimeter and broadcasting focused resonance patterns aimed directly at the source of these observed energy spikes. It's a long shot, but if we can disrupt the anomaly's coherence— Kale interrupted, his tone flat, but carrying an edge of dismissal. Ambassador, your proposal is predicated on interpreting meaningless data corruption as actionable intelligence. The energy signatures you highlight fall within the standard deviation of sensor malfunction caused by negative space phenomena. The probability of achieving anomaly stabilization or dissipation via sonic or subspace resonance, based on known physics of such events, is statistically negligible. Likely 0. Unit 12 added, furthermore, diverting 15% of evacuation resources reduces the success probability for the full evacuation of Xylos Prime to 85% and critically delays deployment. It increases the probability of total loss across all 3 worlds from near 0 to 38.7%. Your plan is illogical. It introduces extreme risk based on unsubstantiated conjecture. Illogical? Or merely beyond current logic? Lee countered, leaning forward, his voice filled with sudden intensity. Your logic dictates accepting the loss of nearly 2 billion lives because the data is incomplete. But what if the key is in the corrupted data? What if standard physics don't fully apply to an unknown anomaly? Sometimes, Axiom Kael, logic only shows you the most likely path within the current known parameters. It can't account for the completely unknown. Sometimes you need something else. Call it intuition, call it a leap of faith, call it analyzing data subconsciously based on experience to see a possibility that exists outside the predictable. He gestured emphatically at the screen. Risk? Yes, there's risk. But the alternative is the certainty of immense loss. My hunch might be wrong. But if it's right, we save everyone. Isn't that possibility worth considering when the logical path guarantees tragedy? There was a moment of silence. Kael's gaze remained fixed on Lee, unreadable. The mediator eventually intoned. The holographic display split. On one side, the Volpyran plan unfolded with cold precision. Ships converged on Xylos Prime, evacuation commenced, while ominous darkness swiftly swallowed Baron 4 and Cygnia Minor. Projected outcome, 8.2 billion saved, 1.85 billion lost. On the other side, Lee's simulation played out. A smaller fleet approached the anomaly, broadcasting energy. The erratic pulses on the screen seemed to react, fluctuating wildly. For tense virtual hours, nothing definitive happened, evacuation efforts proceeding slowly. Then, dramatically, the simulated anomaly began to destabilize, the resonance apparently finding a harmonic frequency. It fractured, sputtered, and dissipated into harmless background radiation 60 virtual hours after the simulation began. Projected outcome: all 3 worlds safe. 0 lives lost. The twin simulations concluded, leaving their final outcomes starkly displayed above the table. The Volpyran delegation was utterly still. Unit 7 and Unit 12 were running rapid diagnostics, cross-referencing the simulation parameters against known physical laws and Federation computational standards, searching for error. Chief Axiom Kael simply stared at the side of the hologram depicting Lee's successful, improbable outcome. His silver face, usually a mask of pure logic, showed the faintest flicker in his dark eyes. Not emotion, perhaps, but the processing signature of encountering data that fundamentally challenged established models. Confusion, rendered in Volpyran terms. Jian Li waited, letting the silence stretch. He didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. He spoke softly into the quiet. It's not magic, Axiom Kael. We don't pull solutions out of thin air. He gestured towards the simulation results. Perhaps intuition or a hunch is simply our biological processes, our brains, recognizing complex patterns subconsciously. Maybe it's drawing parallels from millions of unrelated data points accrued over a lifetime, or even evolutionary memory from navigating a chaotic planetary environment for millennia. We don't always understand the how of it ourselves. He met Kael's steady gaze. But we've learned, through trial and error, often costly error, that sometimes these non-logical insights point towards truths that strict, step-by-step logic, especially with incomplete data, might miss. It's a tool, a vital one, we believe, to be used alongside rigorous analysis, not necessarily instead of it, especially when logic leads only to a dead end, or towards a solution with an unacceptable cost in lives. Kyle remained silent for several more seconds, processing Lee's words alongside the simulation data. Finally, he spoke, his voice still flat, but perhaps infinitesimally slower, as if carefully choosing each word. The Hunch-based methodology yielded a statistically superior outcome in this specific, incomplete data simulation. He tilted his head slightly. The mechanism remains non-quantifiable. The potential for catastrophic failure, if the intuition is incorrect, remains high. 38.7% risk is not insignificant. He paused again, then continued. However, the result is logically undeniable in this instance. Failure to acknowledge a successful outcome, regardless of methodology, would be illogical. It was the closest thing to a concession Lee could have hoped for. Kyle turned towards the mediator. Volpyran consensus revises its initial assessment. While inherent unpredictability remains a factor requiring significant study, the potential utility of the human factor, intuition, illogical problem-solving, in navigating unforeseen variant circumstances warrants further analysis within the Federation framework. He looked back at Lee. There was no warmth, no offer of friendship, only logical progression. Volpyran consensus will therefore recommend Terran probationary candidacy. Extended observation is required to integrate understanding of these human factor variables into Federation risk assessment models and alliance protocols. It wasn't a full welcome, but it was a start, a significant shift from outright rejection. The door to the Galactic Federation, previously closed by cold logic, had been nudged open by the undeniable, if unexplainable, results of a human hunch. Jian Li allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Understanding, like space travel, was often a journey taken one improbable leap at a time.